Tonight, I'm looking at one of the strangest side stories connected to the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. It's not about the ransom note debate or the intruder theory. Instead, it involves Christmas traditions, a man who played Santa Claus, and a series of coincidences that investigators felt they had to examine. None of what I'm going to talk about today proves involvement in the case, but when you start lining up the details, you can understand why this thread in the case has continued to intrigue people for decades. Let's talk about the Santa connection. The man at the centre of this story was Bill McReynolds. McReynolds was a retired journalism professor who worked as a Santa performer around Boulder during the holidays. For several years, he had played Santa at parties attended by the Ramsey family, including their Christmas gatherings. In fact, he had played Santa at the Ramseys' party just 3 days before JonBenet's death. And it wasn't the first time. It had been his 3rd year attending their celebration as Santa Claus. During one of those events, he reportedly interacted with JonBenet in a way that stuck with people afterward. McReynolds had put glitter in his beard as stardust, and the little girl loved the idea. Later, he described it in an interview, saying that JonBenet gave him a small vial of glitter. He called it stardust and kept it with him, even taking it to the hospital when he underwent major surgery. He said he eventually gave one of the vials back to the Ramsey family for their Christmas celebration, explaining that children should be celebrated more. It's an odd little story, but that wasn't the only reason investigators took a closer look at him. Another detail that caught attention was that McReynolds had been given a tour of the Ramsey home in 1995 by JonBenet. That's the year before the murder. The house was large and complicated, with over 6,800 square feet across multiple levels and a basement area that could be confusing to someone unfamiliar with it. Knowing the layout of the house was something detectives were interested in when examining possible suspects. There was also a Christmas card McReynolds had written to JonBenet. On the card, he mentioned that Santa would bring her a special present after Christmas. And after her death, that card was reportedly found in the trash. But the deeper investigators looked into McReynolds' background, the stranger the coincidences started to feel. One of the most unsettling involves something that happened decades earlier. On Boxing Day in 1974, note that Boxing Day is 22 years later, the same day that JonBenet was murdered, that McReynolds' 9-year-old daughter and her friend were abducted. Now, during that incident, the friend was sexually assaulted, and the McReynolds' daughter had to witness that attack. They were released afterwards, though, and this crime was never solved. And this was exactly 22 years prior to the day that JonBenet was murdered. So when JonBenet was killed during the Christmas holiday, some people found it eerie that a man connected to the family had already experienced a child abduction in his own life on the exact same date, though 22 years earlier. But another strange connection involved McReynolds' wife Janet. She was a playwright who had written a dramatic work based on a real crime. Nothing wrong with that, you would think, but the play was a fictionalised version of the 1965 torture and murder of Sylvia Likens, a teenage girl who was abused and killed in Indiana. And she was also kept in a basement. In that story, The victim was held in the house and ultimately died there. The play reportedly earned a Regional Arts Award and a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in the 1970s. However, the script was never widely published, and reporters later said they had difficulty locating a copy. Again, none of that suggests involvement in the Ramsey case, but investigators noted the unusual overlap between the themes of the play and the circumstances of a young girl being found dead in a home basement. There were also personal issues within the McReynolds family that surfaced during the investigation. Their son, Jesse McReynolds, had previously been arrested in a separate case involving allegations that he tried to lure an 11-year-old girl into his car. The incident had nothing to do with the Ramsey case, but when detectives investigate everyone connected to a victim, they examine family histories as well. Then there was the forensic side of the case. DNA evidence discovered during the investigation suggested that more than one person's DNA may have been present, but the genetic material was limited. According to investigators, there were not enough markers to clearly identify or eliminate specific individuals, and because of that, the DNA evidence has remained a complicated and debated part of the investigation. After JonBenet's death, McReynolds reportedly became very upset by the tragedy. His wife later said he burned his Santa suit and vowed never to play Santa again. He died in 2002, still denying any involvement in the crime. Over the years, some people have pointed to additional claims or suspicions about him, including theories about travel straight after the murder, or suggestions that he might have tried to destroy evidence, hence the burning of the Santa suit. But none of these claims were ever proven, and investigators ultimately did not charge him with any crime related to the case. So in the end, Bill Reynolds remains one of the many people detectives examined while trying to understand what happened to JonBenét Ramsey. The Santa connection is strange. The timing of the earlier kidnapping is strange. The play written by his wife is strange. But strange coincidences happen in real-life investigations, and they don't always point to guilt. What they do show is just how many unusual threads investigators had to pull on while trying to solve a crime that happened on Christmas night inside a quiet home in Boulder. And nearly 3 decades later, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey still hasn't been solved, which is exactly why stories like this continue to be discussed today. If you found this interesting, please let me know in the comments. There are several other strange investigative threads in this case that rarely get talked about, and they're just as unsettling as the Santa connection. Thanks for listening to True Crime with Kris. I'll see you in the next video.